Hey ghoulies, Whimsy here, and if you know anything about me, I have a serious phobia of needles and getting my blood drawn to the point where I have to be medicated to have procedures done. However, I am also a masochist, so I love medical horror and fiction. So guess what I did? I read a horror post-apocalyptic book called The Phlebotomist. And guess what? There's a lot of blood drawing in it. So that was cathartic to experience. So thank you so much, NetGalley and Angry Robot, for giving me a review copy in exchange for a fair and honest review. And now I get to discuss all the bloody details with you guys. And because there is a rare occurrence of me actually being surprised by a plot twist, I'm actually going to have a non-spoiler section and a clearly marked spoiler section so I can get into all the juicy details. But let's get into the review. The story follows a nuclear fallout and the remaining survivors of humanity who become obsessed with blood to the point where they develop a whole entire caste system where you have the universal donors, so the O negatives, they are in high society. And then at the bottom of the barrel, you have the universal recipients, so the AB positives, who are living in the slums and struggling to eat, and people are desperately trying to sell their blood, and to the point where there's even blood muggings where people forcefully draw and steal blood from other people. And then you have the unpure, the people with like the blood-based diseases who are entirely sent away from the rest of society. However, there is an old school phlebotomist named Willa who rediscovers an old blood separation technique that would render this whole caste system obsolete. It would topple everything. And of course, the government doesn't like that too much. So she finds herself fighting for her life as well as humanity's. For me, the story really excels in its world building, and it kind of reminds me of Bloodborne.
We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open. Fear the old blood.
Which is like one of my top favorite video games of all time. Of course, instead of being like a Victorian Gothic, this is a post-apocalyptic where people are just obsessed with blood. But I will give the author serious credit here. He did his research, so there's all these technical explanations, and there's even like definitions of medical terms at the beginning of each chapter. So it lends this sense of realism to this book so I could become more immersed into it. So yeah, if you're looking for a genre-bending horror sci-fi, I recommend this novel for you. And to get into kind of the twists and turns of it, I am moving on into spoiler territory, so you've been warned. Make sure to pause this video and bookmark it, unless you don't mind spoilers. Alright, I think it's safe to say that I've read a lot of books, and it's hard to surprise me at this point, but congrats! This book threw me for a curveball, it threw me for a loop, and I think because it was so scientific based, I was not expecting vampires in my sci-fi. But here we are, we got vampires, and in fact, at, I guess you could say, the turn. So at the plot twist, when there is a reveal that her coworker, I was like, okay, we're building up to something. I'm feeling tension here. And she's like, no, we need whole blood. And then her jaw opens and I just screamed. I was like, ah, we have aliens! But it was not aliens, it was vampires. So, plot twist, it transcended into a genre bender at that point. However, it had so much potential for me that it became a letdown after that point. And here is why. Because everything was, I would call it like almost hard sci-fi, very factually based, and it became believable that way. When we don't get explanations that are as scientific, the story started losing believability for me at that point. I had so many questions. I know I was like the nerd in class who would always ask questions. So I got way more questions than answers following that plot twist about a third of the way in. And I do love genre benders because I think it's called like Daybreakers does a really cool sci-fi interpretation of vampires, and this is zombies, but with The Girl with All the Gifts, my favorite zombie novel of all time. It's very sci-fi based, so it's based off of a real life fungus called it's like a Latin name, so it's like cordyceps, but it's called like the zombie fungus. Because it was based off of a real life fungus, it had believability there, and I almost wish there was more of a solid foundation for the explanation of vampirism besides, oh yeah, you turn and then they have like this weird tentacle parasite that's implanted into their brain to control them and compel them or control their compulsion. But there's not really an explanation because all the vampire lore is thrown out the window here. They're like, yeah, holy water doesn't work. So then you need to replace it. But with what? There's not an explanation for the turning, why they need blood. Why don't they just create a blood substitute in the future? Like, you'd think they'd have the technology. Or why would they go through the effort of having free range humans? That seems like a huge risk. Why don't they just have a human farm and harvest blood from them there? For me, that kind of broke my immersion, and that's where I both was most hyped and then I felt the most let down, if that makes sense. So I wish there was a more scientific explanation and it was more well-rounded, well-developed in the vampire lore of this book. Because I am a vampire freak. That's kind of what I did my senior thesis on, vampirism in Gothic literature, so I am serious about my vampires. Someone else might not be as persnickety, as fussy with those details, but for me, it detracted from the novel, and I wish almost like the editor had asked more questions so the book could be more rounded out. But other than that, it was a fast-paced page turner. I was fully immersed at the beginning. I just wished the rest of the world had been fleshed out. But if you want something unique, I'd say that The Phlebotomist is a spooky treat for you. Well, that's all I have to say about this book. Let me know if you plan on picking it up, if you know of any more medical-based horror, and what your favorite genre-bending work of fiction is. Down below, as always, thank you for watching. I hope you stay safe. I hope you stay well. And I'll catch you on the flip side. Bye.